Welcome friends to another r/malicious compliance video. As always, if you enjoy this video, please make sure to hit that subscribe button. And our first story of the day is by Rhonda the Honda. Manager tells me you need to know which rules to follow. When I was in grad school, about 15 years ago, I was working nights and weekends in a convenience store. It also happened to be the first time the fuel prices shot up to $4 plus per gallon. Because of this, there were quite a few people who pumped gas and drove off, prompting our company to institute a pay-before-pumping policy. The company was a small regional chain of gas stations/convenience stores in a largely rural area. They were concerned about any loss. So much so that in the company newsletter, they announced firing someone for regular theft from the store. The theft in question was when an employee refilled her fountain drink while on duty. Another example was that we were required to do money drops anytime we had more than $200 in the cash register. Another employee was fired because she was robbed at gunpoint and hadn't done a money drop. There was approximately $205 in the register at the time. So when this new policy came out, I wasn't about to risk my job over someone filling up and driving off with a tank full of gas on my watch. My manager was really good about working around my needs for class, research, etc. while working on my degree. So I put up with this and wanted to keep my job. One night I'm working and someone pulls up to get gas. The machine beeps, letting me know someone's trying to fuel up before paying. I won't pre-authorize because policy. Customer comes in and demands I let him fill up before paying. I explain the policy, and he lights into me with perhaps every expletive he knows. I'd like to say I was professional, but I returned his hospitality. The next day when I show up for work, my manager's waiting for me, clearly unhappy. He's a regular customer and we want to keep them happy. I explained to her that, regular customer or not, I wasn't willing to risk my job over a drive-off when people are getting fired for losing such little sums of money. The manager states, I see what you're saying, but you have to learn which rules to follow. Now, she's been with the company for about 15 years. She could get some leeway. I'd been there less than a year. I had no leeway. So I asked her, please put in writing which rules I'm expected to follow and which rules I don't. Or put in writing which customers are exceptions to policy and which ones are not. Until then, I'm following all the company's policies. I'm not surprised that she wouldn't put that in writing. Fast forward about a week, I'm working solo on a Sunday afternoon when someone I've never seen before comes in and yells at me for not pre-authorizing his pump. I explained the company policy and that he would have to prepay, just like everyone else. Customer claimed he was with corporate and that he should be allowed an exception. I informed him that if he really was from corporate, he'd know about this policy and would expect me to follow it. I even pointed to the policy statement in the window for him to read. The customer yelled at me and stormed off before I could reply. Turns out, this stranger was from corporate and even the VP of the company. He called to complain to my manager about my refusal to let him pump first. She repeated my arguments as to why I refused to risk my job and that he should be glad to know they have such loyal employees. VP said that the policy was meant for regular customers and not for employees. She replied, please put into writing which rules we're expected to follow and which ones we are not. If you found yourself in an OP situation and a person pulls up and they say they're from corporate and to let them pump first, would it make you think that this might be some kind of test or something to see if you follow the policy? Let me know in the comments down below because I feel like I'd feel that way. This next story is by Career Path Lost. Don't walk on your property, you got it. This one goes back to the previous neighborhood our family lived in. It was a really nice, quiet horseshoe-shaped street, but it had no sidewalks. When my wife and I would walk the dogs and our kids, we would have to walk in the street. This wasn't a problem unless a car came and we would have the kids step aside into the grass to stay out of the street while the car passed. The neighborhood was built in the 80s and many residents are original owners. Mostly nice, but of course, we have some nasty humanoids among them. One neighbor in particular seems to always have to say something mean when we go by. She is a deacon at the church my family goes to and is the type to be religious for face value only. One day in particular, she yelled at us for allowing our kids to step in her grass while avoiding a car in the road, and I told her that they were just stepping aside until the car passed. She got overly angry and started spraying a hose at us and screaming like a banshee. We hurried the kids away and told them they did nothing wrong, and from now on, we will walk on the other side of the street. About 2 weeks later, her and her husband got a new shed installed at their house, and had to have the property surveyed for it. As I drove by, I noticed something. The front property boundary was about 10 feet back from the road. The houses on their side of the street all stay a little farther back. I had a friend who does surveying come out and do our property, and sure enough, our boundary was about 3 feet from the road. We did some digging through the archives at City Hall and found that the neighborhood was permitted and designed to have a sidewalk that ran the length of the horseshoe on her side of the street. That 10-foot right-of-way was designed to have curbing, grass, and then a sidewalk. So I did what any sane person would do in this situation, and I contacted the township to have a sidewalk put in. The township notified all residents of the request and held an open hearing for it during a township meeting. Most of the neighbors showed up in support of it, most didn't care, but that nasty woman showed up to protest it and raise all heck. A month later, they began excavating for the sidewalk, and when they got to her house, she had planted a big landscape piece with flowers and shrubs and a tree right in the way. The township told her to remove it, she didn't, they fined her and removed it themselves. The best part of the story is that 2 weeks after the sidewalk was finished and in, we listed our house and moved to another neighborhood. She still makes nasty remarks to my mother at church, and we drive by her house while visiting our old neighbors every now and then. And for some reason, these are the kinds of people that fuel off of this hatred for any and everything, and they'll live to 105 with a big old frown on their face, still despising everything. It's just how the world works sometimes. OP's kids are gonna roll by in like 2050 and she's still gonna somehow be there being a curmudgeon. Don't you get that hoverboard near my yard? This next story is by Noon, perhaps. Maintenance won't fix the problem, so fix it for them. Just some background before we get to the real story. Everyone's college experience is different, but my freshman year was unique because the university was located in the heart of a city and didn't have a typical campus layout. Instead, the university rented out some very old apartment buildings to use for housing. The rooms were all studio layout with beds and a small kitchen that included a stove and medium-sized refrigerator since the school didn't provide meals. The refrigerator is where the true story begins. My roommate and I were returning from winter break, which lasted about 3 full weeks, and when we entered our room for the first time since leaving, we were greeted with a horrible smell of rotting meat. Apparently, early on in the break, the nearly empty apartment building lost power, and our old refrigerator couldn't handle the surge to kick back on once the power was back and essentially died out. Unfortunately for us, the only thing that was in our fridge were some beers, condiments, and some frozen meat in the freezer which my roommate had purchased. Obviously, no one was to blame for the incident, and we contacted maintenance to put in a request for the refrigerator to be removed and a new one brought in. Easy enough. We cleaned out the fridge the best we could and patiently waited for it to be replaced. A few days go by, and we're still living with this nasty, smelly refrigerator without any updates on when it would be replaced. My roommate contacts maintenance, and they explain they're aware of the situation and will fix it soon. We think this is understandable. It's a large building and a lot goes on. Days continue to go by and still no maintenance. We contact them again and are greeted with a hostile, "We have a lot of requests, we'll get to it." Needless to say, they were in no rush to actually get to it. 2 more weeks go by, and the smell has maintained its full strength. My roommate's given up and started staying in another room with some friends. All of our additional requests are ignored, and our calls are met with an answering machine. After a final attempt to contact them with no response, I sat and stared at the empty refrigerator and had an epiphany. Maintenance was clearly too busy to help, so I figured I would do them a favor and relocate the fridge for them. I opened our door and dragged the clumsy, smelly hunk of metal and plastic out to the middle of the hallway directly in front of the elevators. Every single student or visitor would be greeted by the lovely aroma we had been living with for nearly 3 weeks. It didn't take very long for the complaints to pile up, and the refrigerator was gone by the end of the day. Our new refrigerator was delivered the following morning, and our future requests were handled promptly. Sadly, the smell lingered in the halls for a while, and in my memory forever. Although honestly, after 3 weeks of waiting, I feel like they did the right thing. I'm surprised that there wasn't some kind of fine or warning or some kind of retaliation against them putting it in the hallway. They were already being overly crappy and then got to the point where they just straight up ignored you. I'm surprised they didn't quadruple down on it and say, well, you shouldn't have done this. This is a warning against you, or really whatever else they could do. I mean, I'm just glad that they did actually finally take accountability for it, even if it was at the hands of OP and their friend forcing them to. This next story is by Barest Minimum. You're firing me because the uniform you forced only me to wear flatters me? Okay, bye. My first job out of school was as a language teacher in a private school, and it sounds like it's straight out of a fiction book. I was employed to teach grades 6 to 9. However, because I was the only teacher for that language, the owner begged me to teach grade 1 to 5 when I had any time to spare. I wasn't paid for the extra work. I taught each of the classes I was employed to teach twice a week, and the other classes once a week. Aside that, lunch duties were added to my work, so I hardly sat all day. The school had a preschool at a different location, and all the teachers there wore uniforms. The preschool workers, all females, were the only ones required to wear uniforms. I was the only female teacher on the grade 1 to 9 staff. One day, the owner calls me to her office and asks me why I'm not in a uniform like the preschool staff. I tell her no one informed me about wearing uniforms in my department, and also the male teachers don't wear uniforms. She gets slightly angry and orders me to sew one with my own money. I try to protest, but I see there's no way getting through to her. My parents convince me to let it go and sew one. When she sees me in the uniform, she goes off about how flattering my uniform is on me, tells me I'm trying to seduce the boys, and calls me a prostitute. She orders me to sew a new one or don't come back. My uniform was not short, way below the knee, didn't show cleavage, nor was it tight. I ignore her, and she fires me a week later while I'm in the middle of a class. I just packed my stuff and left. The next day, the principal calls me to tell me the owner is asking why I didn't show up that day. Duh, you fired me. She calls me herself and orders me to come back to work, talking about how do I expect the kids to eat lunch. Good luck finding a donkey like me to work for that pittance. I went back though, but not without double my pay. I then quit the next month. I really don't understand what the argument was here. Because the clothes were actually properly fitted for OP, they said, no, that's too revealing or something, but it's not revealing. I don't know about you guys, but I think this person just radiates jealousy. And our final story of the day is by Panda2297. Timesheets are due at 5 p.m. I work as a remote system engineer, and I work with project managers. We have these timesheets that have a deadline of Friday at 5 p.m. And although they have a Friday deadline, the project managers don't ever start working on them until next week. Pretty pointless, but I submit mine a little early around 4 p.m. And the project manager whom I worked with really liked it as she could fill them out and get them done. She was the only one who actually did the billing on Friday right before she left for 5. So I made her life pretty easy. One day, I had my son's soccer game get bumped up as they were playing 2 games due to rescheduling from hurricanes. So I gave my project manager a heads up as I was pretty booked solid and wouldn't have time to work on the timesheets. I told her after I got back home, I would put them in later tonight. She was like, oh, that's perfectly okay, sweetie. I submitted the timesheet around 7, thinking all is good. I get a call from my boss, whom I will say is usually quite chill. He was telling me that the project manager complained to her boss and he's hearing it. He was very nice but told me that I must follow the company policy of timesheets being in by 5 o'clock. That way he didn't have to hear about the complaining and I'm good. So remember how I said I submitted them early? That courtesy has expired. The following week, I get a ping from my project manager at 4:30. She's asking if I submitted my timesheet yet as she's looking to leave a little early. I told her I did not, and I'm following the policy of getting the timesheets in by 5 p.m. What I did was have my timesheet saved as a draft, but wouldn't actually finalize it until 4:59. I even pinged her and told her the timesheet's all in. So then she had to stay later, as she was always insistent on doing billing on Friday. One week she asked me pretty please if I could fill out my timesheet a little earlier as she's going on PTO and was leaving early on Saturday. I'm thinking, not my problem, but I said in my happiest voice, I'll try my best. I submitted it at 4:57. Eventually she complained to her boss. My boss talked to me and mentioned it. However, my boss said he's technically submitting his timesheets on time, and he chewed out the project manager's boss. I didn't hear it, but he told me all about it. The project manager eventually got fired as she was a pretty bad project manager. And as I do my timesheets on a Friday, this memory pops up from time to time. OP gets this stuff early just because they like to, and it makes their life better. And the one time OP wants a little assistance from them, they go, "Oh, okay, sure, sweetie, that's fine," and then just totally backstabs them. I would have done the same thing as OP. It's like, what the heck? I've been doing good for you for so long and now you're just going to backstab me at the first chance you get? Well, I'm not going to give you any courtesy anymore. All I'm saying is I'm not surprised that that person got fired for being a bad employee. But with that being said, that's a wrap on another bunch of stories here today. As always, if you guys have any favorite videos of this bunch, let me know which one in the comments down below and why. And if you enjoyed the stories in general, if you could subscribe to this channel, it'd mean a lot to me. I make these videos daily, and it's by far and away the best way to support my channel. So no matter what you did, whether it was subscribing or liking, leaving a comment, I just appreciate the heck out of you guys. And as always, I'll be back tomorrow with even more stories right here on the Storytime channel.